parses HTML, and what it claims to do is to strip down all potentially dangerous content within HTML. It strips out things like object tags, embed tags. These are things that you use usually for showing plugin content like QuickTime or Windows Media, things like that. Strips out any kind of JavaScript, any way that could be associated in there. That looks like a really useful tool, and I'm definitely going to be looking at that closely. Again, that's the URL for it if you really want to check it out. Is pair.php.net/package/HTML safe. But you can just go to pair.php.net and search for it there. Protecting with SQL injections. Basically, you're going to want to be, if you can't do some of the more advanced stuff, the basic thing you want to do is you want to use escaping functions like MySQL real escape string. What this does is this actually passes the string that you pass in to MySQL C library that does escaping for it. So you're doing it. That's what the MySQL developers said. This is how you escape stuff. You're passing it to that. Better ideas for databases that actually support it, like PostgreSQL, Oracle, MS SQL Server, things like that, is to use things like prepared statements. Those are nice because the escaping has to be done by the driver before it can actually push the prepared statement at it. That's the way that prepared statements work. It has to be escaped properly. So if your driver supports it and does it, it has to escape things properly. And that pretty much, I hate to say, I hate to make it'll never happen, but prepared statements should almost entirely eliminate the possibility of SQL injections. With code injections, really you should just never use something like eval. One of the PHP developers, I think it was Rasmus Ladorf, said that if eval is the answer, you're asking the wrong question. Basically, there are very, 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 very few situations where eval is ever going to be the good way to do things. So you should really rethink it if you ever think that you need to use it. You have to be careful with file uploads. I've seen some stuff where there was a vulnerability in one app where they weren't doing proper checking against file extensions. So somebody where it was a part of a web app, you were supposed to be able to upload images. Well, it didn't properly check the extensions on things. So somebody could upload something with a .php extension, and then because of the way the web app worked, it could then execute that PHP. Well, again, that's simple input validation, but you have to be careful with file uploads. File uploads get especially bad if you have register globals turned on. It's really, really bad. You should, again, that's another reason, never have that on in your scripting environment. And I would say, if at all possible, you should avoid the use of user-submitted data in shell calls. Shell calls, anything dealing with files or any kind of, say you're calling a shell, calling some kind of shell command. If you absolutely positively must do it, you have to filter and escape with extreme prejudice. You should never, ever let stuff, don't ever take it lightly if you ever have to pass stuff to the shell. This is a simple example of where you're getting a remote user thing in the server array, and to do that, and you're looking up like somebody's home directory. For some reason, your web app is doing that. And I guess I could probably imagine some cases. Basically, what we've got here is this: you're using a Perl regular expression library stuff to match against the username, and basically it says if it does not match these characters in here, then it should die immediately. That is something where, again, as Pascal Meunier pointed out to me, you want to whitelist stuff where there are certain characters that are allowed, and if it has a character that is not allowed, that is not whitelisted, then it should die. That's a better approach than blacklisting stuff, because if you blacklist, there's a very good possibility that you're going to miss something. With scripting practices, you've got to filter your output. Basically, you don't assume that your input filters are perfect. That would be a really bad idea. You need to filter what's coming out of your application as well. You should assume that any user created content, even stuff that you have filtered, even if you're the best, most kick-ass filtering dude in the world, you should never, ever assume that it's not tainted. Some PHP functions that are useful for that, HTML special chars. What that does is that converts things like the less than, the greater than signs. If you have the end quotes constant passed to it, it will escape quote marks and apostrophes, and it basically strips that stuff out. It makes it much more difficult for somebody, if you've missed something, it basically strips that out, so any tags that they've tried to pass in, it'll make them so they can't be executed by the client. HTML entities essentially does the same thing, but it does a more advanced version, but the security implications are basically the same. And again, as I mentioned before, you need to encode anything that you're going to use in an URL. You need to encode that properly. PHP has a nice function for that called URL encode. I want to mention, I mentioned tainted modes before. Languages like Perl and Ruby have these tainted modes where the interpreter limits what you can do with certain stuff based on where that's coming from. That's a really useful thing. There's a tainted mode that some research has been done on with PHP, but it's not really clear that's going to be in the main distro anytime soon. Hopefully, they will seriously consider that. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to kind of go through this stuff quickly, which I have been anyway, but even quicker. Service level filtering. A really, really, really cool well, actually, it's a module for Apache. It's called ModSecurity. It's described as a web application firewall. What it does is it scans all of your incoming data, and one of the things that sets it apart from other approaches is that it can also scan post data that most of the other techniques can't. It also works with HTTP and secure HTTP. There's a couple examples here of these are filter rules that you set up with ModSecurity. The first one is just it's going to strip out the text drop, and then if there's some kind of space in there, and then table out of any incoming data. So that means anything that shows up in a cookie and you get, post, anything else, it'll strip it out. The second one, it disallows JavaScript and anything except for something called HTML. So there's no way that any kind of scripting tags, I should say, it doesn't really strip JavaScript. It just strips out some kind of script stuff. It strips that out of anything except for some kind of variable that comes in called HTML. That stuff, ModSecurity is a really, really good first line of defense that if you're operating any kind of web application, I would really strongly recommend you have that installed on your server. A couple other things you can do with it. It makes cheat rooting stuff really easy. That's quickly, that's something where you set it up so that the binaries can't basically go above a certain level in the file system. Normally with Apache, that's actually a very complex thing to do. You have to do a bunch of stuff at compile time and mess around with a bunch of stuff, and it becomes complex, and people like me aren't very good at that. That's all you have to do is that one command to cheat root Apache if you have ModSecurity installed. Much easier. It also makes changing the server signature easy. That's actually a lie here. The guy who developed ModSecurity said that it's not necessary to do with Apache 2. I forgot to correct this. You don't use mod headers. You want to do it with Apache 2 as well, because with mod headers, if it sends an invalid command, it'll still send the full thing. The server signature in Apache typically reports that you're running Apache, that you're running this version, and typically it will report things like, oh, I'm running PHP of this version. I'm running, I've got WebDAV of this version. I've got all these different modules installed of this version, blah, blah, blah. Well, you can just change that, again, with one command, with the sex server signature. And you can say, hey, you know what? I'm going to trick people, and I'm going to tell them it's Microsoft IIS. It's not really, it's not a way of really securing things, but it certainly gets people off your back a lot of the time. A lot of people criticize things and say, well, security through obscurity isn't security. Well, no, it's not, but it's not necessarily a bad idea.